floods and the destruction of all or part of the 7 buildings of the World Trade Center. You know, it's fantastic. It was a fantastic event. As Jerry Leapart, our attorney in our 9/11 cases, said, it just didn't make any sense, this whole thing. And of course, it doesn't, because the whole government story makes no sense. You scratch it anywhere superficially, and it all turns to dust because it's all a lie. So in closing, Abe, I think yours is a great resource. It's a great story. I admire your courage in pursuing the truth against all these obstacles. And so what would you advise? How should people proceed in educating themselves and maybe becoming activists like you?
Well, let's see. I think honestly, the first step is to just understand the facts, because without the facts, you yourself won't actually know what happened. And I know it's hard. It takes time to read and to watch videos and to look at pictures and graphs and to learn about them. But honestly, if you really care, then that's the first step you got to take, is to know what happened for yourself so that you can help other people to know. Because there's a lot of clout, there's a lot of disinformation, there's a lot of distracting and confusing information. So if you can try and cut through all that and actually just look at the facts and go to the sources, don't just look at Dr. Wood's website, even though it is extremely well referenced and very, very credible. Take it even further. Go to the sources that are provided and actually go to the USGS.gov website and the Columbia University Seismographic Institute, Seismology Institute's website, and actually look at that seismographic data raw from their website. And that's really what helped it sink in for me. And it is so overwhelmingly conclusive, this body of evidence, that it is not a theory and it's not a hypothesis. And it's very troubling to see so many people still referring to it as such, because it's an incorrect statement. And I just wanted to share something really quick to kind of close from my end to help articulate why that is, because a lot of people don't have the scientific understanding to know when something is not a theory anymore or not a hypothesis anymore, for example. So just wanted to share that theory, speculation, and belief are not necessary to understand that directed energy was used on 9/11. Rather, only detailed study of the empirical evidence from 9/11 is necessary. Situations like this are rare in science, I'll admit, when there's so much empirical evidence that one can actually bypass the process of theorizing and speculating to instead draw an irrefutable conclusion from that evidence. And this is actually a major difference between Dr. Wood and other researchers, is that she did not lead with a theory and try to fit evidence to her theory or find evidence to support it. She simply gathered as much of the evidence from 9/11 as she could, everything from weather to the dust samples to witness testimonies, everything.
So we've talked about these 3 things. Now we're going to talk about dustification and lather. You'll notice I use a unique language. If you don't know what the phenomenon is and you use the name of a known phenomenon, that's wrong. You're misleading the direction the information is going in. You're calling something like fire when it's not fire. That's why I use the word fumes, because if you use smoke, you're assuming the cause to be fire. If you don't know what the phenomenon is, better not use a name of a known phenomenon. Well, what happened to these buildings? That's a phenomenon we've never seen before. It needs a new name. I call it dustification. The buildings turn to dust. It's not a difficult word to remember either. And often I use names of food, like Cheetos or something like that. You're not going to confuse this with food. It's better than using characteristic 493-7A. You're not going to remember that. But we're going to talk about dustification. As we talked about before, this is turning to dust as it falls. People often see these squirts ahead of the collapse wave. But what was that? If it's bombs, you'd see a flash and you'd see a whole lot more of them. But if you have the whole building turning to dust as it comes apart, What about the water tanks that are distributed throughout the building? They're going to get weaker and weaker as they're dissolving until they suddenly give way. And I'm tempted to believe that might indeed be what that is. We don't know. But if you got that whole building down on the ground in like 8 seconds, let's say 9.5 seconds, just to give it some extra, it would have to be squirting out here at the base at a minimum of Mach 1.5. The air from the middle to get to the outside is like Mach 2.5. For sure, all of the adjacent buildings should look like they were machine gun fired. That's a lot stuff to squirt out of the way. And that's assuming the building took, 9.5 seconds to come to the ground. So you just have this couple little puffs. Something's not right there, too. Now, people who say, okay, they claim they heard explosions. And so therefore, it must be bombs in the building. They're starting with assuming what did it, and then going back to assuming what problem they're solving, instead of determining first what happened. Well, if you recall, blasting zone ahead, turn off cell phones and two-way radios just in case it triggers something. How are you going to get everyone to unknowingly turn off all their cell phones in southern Manhattan for weeks ahead while they prepare the site? But there were sounds of explosions. Bombs go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb. Think of putting an egg in your microwave oven. Turns out there's a lot of folks who talked about these Scott packs exploding at ground level, sitting on the fire trucks. There's a lot of testimony here. We don't need to go over it, but there's various firefighters who talked about hearing these Scott tanks exploding. Now this is slow motion of Tower 1 coming apart. And you notice this, there'll be some column that starts falling down this corner. I think it's in here. And we're going to follow it down and watch how it just turns to dust completely. And as well as these other things. Here it is. Okay, it's got the dust trailing behind it. This is a solid piece. It's like ice cream melting. It's going away. And if you focus on various other parts, you'll see the same thing. There's no sound with this. This is a high-speed version. You can see that piece again. And these big chunks over here. So you see it's turning to dust as it comes down. And we're going to go look down on the ground right next to where this was coming down. This is the Verizon building here. Whoops, right here. And we're going to look at the corner right below there. That's the Verizon building right there. This is that intersection where that material was falling. Right after everything's settled, these people who were hiding come out of their hiding places. And they're probably in awe. There's, no building here. You can see sky. Looking at the body language, the guy with his hands on his hips, arms folded, arms at side, they're probably in total amazement and shock and just bewildered. I call this picture the Twilight Zone because they probably felt like they just walked into the Twilight Zone. A bunch of cars went into spontaneous combustion, apparent spontaneous combustion up here with a sea of unburned paper in between. And here's that toasted car lot. But we're going to look at various directions of watching this dustification. There's a cluster of core columns that remains here. Watch what happens to them. They just faint. I believe that's the upper part of where those firefighters survived in stairwell B. Those are core columns. This is another one. See how it peels away like a banana? And you see this clear air around it. Some folks like to say dust settled on it. Well, dust can't settle on something like that fast, without seeing it. And there's from across the river, you can see those two. And then there's a sequence from the northern view. And you know, my detractors like to say, oh, it fell over. And because the dust was so fine, it hung in the air. Well, if the dust is so fine it hung in the air, how could it be settled instantly on these vertical columns? We saw it was peeled away like a banana. But it comes a point where it's no longer a crisp boundary and just turns to dust. I call it dustification. I mean, where have we seen it before? There goes one more round. But you're told to see a collapse, so you tune that out. You can see all of this just frothing up into dust. That part. And it's also blowing downward. Very clean edges. So it isn't like dust was settling on it. And another part of it, this is further up than this image, because this is coming down close to this building. But notice there's some chunks that go missing. And notice the dust kind of squirting out the ends of those pieces. You can see it trailing. So the reason why it didn't, you didn't hear a thud when it hit. Lather is a term I use when it looked like another unique behavior pattern, but I think lather is just the part doing the same thing that this is doing, but doing it in place. And this video is of Building 7, the north face, but notice it's one face and one face only that has this lather pouring out of it.
No, go low to the corner.
Notice it's spiraling around. And if it was smoke from a fire and it really needed to get out, why isn't it coming out these windows? If there's a traffic jam, why does it take the path of least resistance? The wind that day was 7 or 8 miles an hour.
No, go low to the corner.
Now we're going to look at dust rollout and fuzzballs. This wall of dust is pouring down the street. It was chasing people, and it overtook them. Didn't cook them. Just left them covered with dust. I like these abrupt lines. Like you can see where this other fellow's tie was tucked in there. He was just covered. He didn't get cooked. The dust went a certain distance and then went up. Another bizarre thing. Again, it's important just to take in all of the data, and it starts telling you the story of what happened. Let the evidence tell you the story instead of forcing it to go a particular direction. And I wouldn't have seen this before, that just all particular distance then goes up.